welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. Are you a parent of a pathologically demand-avoidant child or teen, or are you a therapist, occupational therapist, teacher, or clinician who works with a PDA child or teen? If so, this video is for you. Hi, I'm Casey, founder of At Peace Parents, and I've worked with hundreds of families to help them stabilize their home, get unstuck, and find peace while parenting pathologically demand-avoidant children and teens. So today I'm going to focus on 9 super practical strategies that you can do immediately in the home or in your clinic in order to start signaling safety to the PDA child or your PDA child's survival brain. What do I mean by the survival brain? Simply the limbic system, and within that, the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that detects threat. It detects, am I safe? Am I in danger? Am I in life threat? Okay. And what we know about pathologically demand-avoidant children and teens is that they have hypersensitive neuroception and hypersensitive nervous systems. There's also an added dimension, which is the thing that sets off their nervous system and causes them to detect that threat is unique, which is the perception of a loss of autonomy, freedom and choice, or equality, meaning are they equal to or above or below you as a parent, you as a clinician, their sibling, their friend, or even a social scenario. Okay, so as we go through these 9 practical strategies, I'm going to be drawing on 2 sources of logic and underlying the logic in each one of these so that you can get creative and come up with your own ideas. Okay, so the first source of logic and what potentially makes these strategies also applicable to non-PDA neurodivergent children, children who have been traumatized, or children who have hypersensitive neuroception is an understanding of polyvagal theory and what tells our subconscious brain that we're safe and what tells our nervous system that we're safe. We're going to be combining that with the unique logic and neuroception of pathological demand avoidance and an understanding of how we're triggering the perception of threat because we're putting ourselves in a position of authority or above them, whether it's energetic or physical, and creating losses of autonomy, which signal threat to the PDAer. Okay, so I want you to get into the mindset of experimentation. These are an offering. They can be adjusted, and we want to understand from the reaction of the children and teens whether or not these are supportive of them. If you see them reacting in a way that's negative or saying, stop doing that, obviously don't continue doing that. Let's listen to the child in front of us. Okay, so the first 5 things I'm going to talk about: eyes, smile, your physical movements, getting physically below the child or teen and not engaging any direct questions. These are all nonverbal or non-spoken signals of safety mammal to mammal. So this could also be very applicable even if your child is non-speaking. Okay? Doesn't require speaking to signal safety to the subconscious of another mammal. The next 4 do involve spoken language, but we can also adjust them using the way in which we're making verbalizations, and they don't necessarily have to be words. Okay? So especially the first 2, including prosody and tone, attuned volume, and then the last 2 are more spoken language, which is declarative language, and letting them have the last word. Okay, so let's go through each of these, and I'm going to do my best to demonstrate this with my face. Okay, so first of all, we want to pay special attention to the upper half of our face. We are capable of smiling and showing our teeth even if we're not in a safe and social state, right? It could be perceived as threatening if we're not moving the upper half of our face, crinkling our eyes, moving our forehead, and showing movement up here. Why is that? As mammals, we do not have access to movement and the nerves of the vagal system if we are in mobilization or immobilization, meaning if we're in fight, flight, freeze, or if we're in shutdown, okay? So by moving this part of our face, we're signaling non-verbally to the amygdala or the subconscious of the child or teen or human, hey, I'm safe. I'm not going to hurt you, right? And so we can start to create a sense of felt safety just by focusing on our eyes and smiling so that we can see wrinkles and combining that with a smile. This is movement in the face that signals what's called ventral vagal or safe and social. Okay? The third thing we want to experiment with is being cognizant and mindful of our movements. For a child who has hypersensitive neuroception that is related to perceived losses of autonomy, which might be spatial, we don't want to quickly come into their space or startle them, right? Because they're constantly hypervigilant to a source of threat. So we want to be mindful of how we're moving into their space and not making sudden movements. The fourth thing I'm going to suggest is something to experiment with, but works particularly well with many PDA children and sometimes teens, which is to situate yourself physically below your child or teen. There's all different ways to do this. In some cases, it can be more extreme where you let your PDA child or teen climb on top of a car or on the back of couches so that they're physically above you. Or you can intentionally sit below them, like getting on the ground, sitting on the floor while they're in their bed, or sitting on the floor while they're in the couch. Why is this? Well, in terms of our survival brains, it's more threatening to be above someone, sort of more predatorial. But particularly for PDA children, the physical sense of me above my son, for example, is the perception of a loss of autonomy in his space, but also that I'm literally above him. So we want to preempt that threat response so he can stay in his thinking brain and not have that fight-flight response, okay? So the fifth non-spoken or non-verbal thing that we can experiment with is to stop asking so many questions, okay? Whether this is experimenting with not asking any questions at all for the next week. So the particular choice points where parents have a hard time, where they sort of have, their conditioned response when they come down from upstairs in the morning, hey, how'd you sleep? How are you doing? What do you want for breakfast? Or when they pick their kid up for school, how is your school day? What'd you do today, right? So for many kids who aren't PDA or don't have this hypersensitive neuroception or neurodivergence, it makes a lot of sense to be like, hey, how was your day? And engage in reciprocal conversation. It's not going to necessarily set off their threat response. However, for a PDA child, it can activate that perception of a loss of autonomy because they didn't start the conversation and they didn't consent to you speaking to them. And remember, this is happening on a subconscious level. This is not about their temperament. This is not about even preferences that they can articulate. They might say, stop talking, or growl at you when you ask questions, but that's a nervous system response. So experimenting with silence until they initiate. And that's simple in terms of the concept. It is more challenging in implementation. Okay, now we're moving on to the more verbal or spoken practical strategies that we can experiment with. And the first one is prosody, and this sort of has to do with tone. So what do I mean by prosody? Prosody is the sing-songy voice that a mother might have when singing to an infant. So research into the nervous system and polyvagal theory shows that this prosody, the up and down, like singing a lullaby or being like, oh, how are you doing today, is actually going to be regulating and signaling safety on a subconscious level. Okay. And for some PDA kids, especially if they're older, this might feel infantilizing and like a loss of autonomy. So one thing you can experiment with is using a sing-songy tone with another child or with perhaps a cat or a dog in a nearby vicinity, because it doesn't have to be direct towards your child. We're just experimenting with creating a sense of felt safety in the environment. 7, attuned volume. And this is going to be experimental as well. So one of the things that, according to polyvagal theory, can signal threat to our subconscious brain as a mammal is having lots of shifts and increases in volume rather than the sing-songy. However, what's unique about our PDA kids, they often have sensory seeking and dopamine seeking where they're wanting to have that intense input sometimes, right? So we want to experiment with an attuned volume, right? If they're feeling more shut down or, need more love and support, we might experiment with prosody. But if they're in that sensory seeking, I'm bored, we want to match their volume and tone, right? But what you may have heard your child say, which relates back to being mindful of this, is that, why are you yelling at me when you were just speaking in a neutral tone? Okay, that's because of the hypersensitive neuroception. And relating back to the first two that you're experimenting with, crinkling your eyes and smiling and moving the upper half of your face, you may have heard your child say, Mama, are you mad at me? Mama, are you mad at Daddy? When you just had a very neutral tone. And that's because they're neurocepting from their survival brain. There's danger in the environment. Okay, the last two things to experiment with are declarative language and allowing your child to have the last word. Okay, so declarative language, the book I would recommend for this is The Declarative Language Handbook by Linda K. Murphy. It's brilliant and it outlines how to do this, but just to give you an example and plant a seed, this would be, instead of those direct questions, we're simply making statements that are observational. So instead of saying, how was school today? You might just cue that there's a moment where we could have conversation by being like, I had a really nice time this morning in my yoga class. And they might say, I don't care, right? But they also might say, oh, I really like playing soccer at recess, right? Or it might be, instead of, they're walking around, I'm bored, but you make suggestions and they say, no, or growl or reject you. It might be, instead of saying, let's do this, or what do you want to do? We could say, you can, or I can, or just noticing, oh, it's really nice outside. I wonder if the pool's open. So experimenting with that, and obviously going deeper with the book, if that's something you want to try. It's really great for teachers and for clinicians in their speech and occupational therapy sessions from the experience of working with those professionals. Finally, and this one is more about refraining from having the last word yourself, which can feel like you want to, especially if they're not being polite or you feel like you want to engage in a teaching moment, which for a PDAer is going to activate their survival brain because you're trying to teach, and that is going to lead to the perception that you're putting yourself above them in a position of authority without their consent, okay? So even if what they're saying is rude or needs to be corrected, just experimenting with just don't say anything. Allow them to have the last word and allow them to have that last bit of felt safety on a subconscious level by verbally being above you, by having the last word. So I really like these 9 practical things to experiment with because they don't require a lot of materials, if any. They just require you and your regulated nervous system. And they don't require structural changes, which are often necessary over the long term and can be used in the home with siblings around. They can be used in a classroom. They can be used in an occupational therapy setting. And we can just approach each one with curiosity and then observe how the child reacts, and then stick with the ones that feel like they're moving you towards a closer relationship, more felt safety, and a greater degree of trust. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.